So this is our second panel of the day. I'm Stuart Elliott. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Real Deal, and this is New Development Frontiers. Which areas and types of projects are New York City's next hot ticket? So the residential market isn't quite what it used to be. New development sales are a little slower, no doubt. We seem to be in the late innings of a market cycle, perhaps. But big deals are still getting done, record-setting deals even, and billion-dollar condo projects by star architects are still rising, banking on the underlying strength of the New York market. And that's not even taking into account commercial development, which between the World Trade buildings, Hudson Yards, and Manhattan West is at a level that's not been seen in many years. So without further ado, we're going to talk to the developers behind some of these biggest projects in New York City today, and we'll find out whether they see their big paydays, and hint that might be the crazily priced penthouses we talk about today, and what keeps them up at night. So let's welcome everybody, and thank you. So on the far end of the panel, I want to welcome Zeal Feldman. Zeal is the founder of HFZ, one of the most active residential developers in the city today. He's got two separate billion-dollar projects he's working on. One will arguably be the most iconic building under the High Line, designed by Bjarke Engels, who will come up a lot today. He seems to be working on every big project in the city. And also he's working on the conversion of the Bell Nord on the Upper West Side, which is expected to sell out for $1.3 billion. Funny thing, it's actually the second time Zeal owned the building, and he bought it for $14 million in the 1990s. So
15.
It's just
15.
15 million. Okay.
Test.
Still pretty good spread there. Next, we have Marty Berger from Silverstein Properties, the developer of the recently opened 4 World Trade, 3 World Trade, which is set to open next month, and the upcoming 2 World Trade to be designed by Bjarke Engels. Besides having one of the most important development projects in New York City and the world, he's also got some large residential projects we're going to talk about. Thanks, Marty. Next, we have Ken Horn. Ken is the founder of Alchemy Properties, which has developed more than 25 buildings in the last 3 decades. He's got projects right now in Nomad, the Upper West Side, and most notably Lower Manhattan, where his Woolworth building conversion is asking $110 million for the penthouse. So we're going to ask about that today as well. And finally, we have Bentley Zhao. Bentley is the president of New Empire Real Estate, founded by his family in the late 90s. His company flies more under the radar than the others on this panel, but he actually has the widest geographic footprint of any of our panelists, with projects in Brooklyn, Queens, and increasingly Manhattan, including Hell's Kitchen extensively. And his company's developed over 100 projects, resulting in over $1.5 billion in real estate. So welcome to all these guys. Thank you. My first question is, do you think Michael Cohen is going to flip? Just kidding. It's outside the scope of this panel. My first question really is, where are you guys looking for financing today? Marty, Silverstein just went on the Israeli bond market to get financing. You guys have an EB5 regional center. Why the shift? Why not go to traditional banks?
Well, the traditional banks have been constrained by the regulators coming up from Washington and all the regulations based on what went on in the last administration. I think Dodd-Frank, they're still trying to figure it out, and they're still trying to repeal pieces of it. But the other sources of capital around the world are still coming to New York. And when we look at large projects, where we have to have a construction loan greater than $500 million. I'd say 3 years ago there were 1 or 2 players out there, and now there are 7 or 8 players out there that are providing these loans. Mm-hmm. So we're going to a whole host of people where before it was very limited.
Mm-hmm. And so you're starting small with the Israeli bond market, I read, in terms of what you could potentially get there. Do issues like public disclosure of how the buildings are doing, is that a factor or something that bothers you? It doesn't bother us at The Real Deal because we get to write more about your projects, but what do you think?
Well, we're out of our no disclosure period, so I can talk about it a little bit. But we raised money, and Zeal is actually one of the first ones to ever raise money on the Israeli bond market. And it's really not used for debt. It's really used for equity in other projects. So we're not using it as a debt vehicle. We're still going to go out to the large banks and large money funds for construction lending and for permanent financing.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit more about EB5 today. Bentley, what are you seeing with EB5, or what are you guys seeing with EB5? Is that just nothing happening there?
It's still alive. The problem is that there's such a wait to get a visa now. It's in addition to the capital constraints that are in China, that China was the biggest market, and that is almost slowed to a grinding halt. Mm-hmm. But there's still activity in lots of other regions: South Korea, Turkey, India, and other places in the Middle East where we see it active, but they're just not flowing as fast as it used to.
Mm-hmm. And Bentley, what are you seeing? You deal with a lot of Chinese financing, a lot of Chinese money.
Yeah, for the EB5 money today, basically I can say the China market almost dead, you know. So we, like Mark said, we go to other country, try to raise the EB5 money. Mm-hmm. But in China, even though you can raise the EB5 money, the cost is much higher than before. You need to pay probably 6-7%. You know, so it's not include the marketing cost. Probably you're no different than you looking for a mezzanine money locally. Mm-hmm. It's not worth to try to go for that, you know.
Also, Ken, you recently got a loan from Bank of the Ozarks for an Upper West Side project. Zeal, you got one from the Children's Investment Fund for the big Chelsea project. So those are not necessarily traditional lenders. What did they offer that other banks did, and how did those deals kind of come about?
Well, with respect to Children's Fund, they've underwritten some of the most iconic properties in New York, most of them fairly large. And going to one single lender, we found a lot more beneficial to us than having to package. The size of our loan when we got it about a year and a half ago was rather large, and having to package it through JP Morgan, our current lender then, they would have had to bring in several other lending. So you do pay potentially a bit more with the children's funds of the world, but one lender, one requisition, and with a resume of the finest new projects in the last 5-6 years.
And that was a $1.3 billion loan, is that?
1.250.
1.2, close. So is the issue there just logistics of dealing with one lender that's so attractive as one of the issues?
Every developer up here will tell you it's very attractive on a large construction job to deal with one lender, absolutely. Mm-hmm. There's no intercreditor agreements, there's no different committees that different banks sit on. That's where they've actually made their success. And the rate differentials, depending on who the developer is anywhere between 1.75% to 3%, so mm-hmm. quite varied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marty?
It's just the nature of development. Stuff happens. And so you have to go back to your lenders for any number of items during the course of the loan. Mm-hmm. And if you're dealing with one party like Children's Investment Fund, you call one guy and he makes a decision.
Right.
If you're dealing with a bank group and then you're dealing with a mezzanine lender and both of them are participated to lots of different banks or financial institutions, you're dealing with a lot of people to get a simple thing changed.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, with Bank of the Ozarks and your Upper West Side project, is that, you have mezz lending on that, or is it just Bank of the Ozarks?
I mean, we do our developments fairly traditionally. We have not done EB5. We have not gone to the Israeli markets at all. It's really just straight equity and debt. We've actually never used mezz on any of our properties. So up on 81st Street, it was Alchemy and Carlyle who were partners on the deal. And interestingly, we had actually 6 debt proposals. We chose Bank of the Ozarks. It was the first deal we've done with them. But what we found is there's debt in the marketplace. I mean, we're not looking for a $500 million or $1 billion loan. I mean, typically our loans, range from, $100 to $200 million. So the players in that market are a lot different than the Children's Investment Fund and other groups are looking to finance larger and larger projects. But debt for experienced developers, I don't think is really an issue these days. I think there's a lot of competition from regular commercial banks who have done business with all of us up here, who are eager to do business with established long-term developers. And obviously, the Wall Street guys are in the fold as well.
It seems like there's just big players out there as far as developers today, too. I mean, it's just a limited pool of developers who are doing projects, so...
Well, you know, we have heard from a lot of our lenders that in this particular market, they're not looking to lend to people who are novices or looking to lend to people who don't have experience. They are lending to folks who have done this for a long time, and they're lending based on relationships that they've had with developers for a long time.
I joked about Bjarke Ankels earlier. I think he's a genius. His projects are amazing. So he has a design for 2 World Trade Center. He's working on your project, Zeal. He just signed on to be the chief architect of WeWork. Do you ever feel like, do you ever seek a clause with these guys that they're not going to do X number of projects, or do you ever worry about saturation, or is it just like more of a good thing is better?
That's a very general question. He's extraordinarily talented. Came out of Rem Koolhaus. He was a superstar there. You know, as a developer, you try to match up your architect with the product you hope to deliver. Part of that is the location. Part of it is the customer base. In our project in West Chelsea, which is a very young neighborhood, surrounded by Google, the Whitney Museum, artistic, more and more offices moving there. We thought Bjarke, with his age and his vision, especially what he did with Via 57 for the Durst family, would have been a perfect fit for what we're contemplating there. He also designed the Google campus in Palo Alto for them, and they're across the street. So the ability to, and we have a challenge there. It was a 1 million square feet with a 400-foot ceiling, and getting 2 buildings there, not competing with each other. Not many architects were able to go through that process.
Marty, how do you feel?
So I've had the opportunity to work with Bjarke on a number of different things, and what's great, you know, he's in his early 40s, but he's got the stature of a Richard Rogers or a Norman Foster or a David Childs because of his creativity, and he really throws himself and his whole firm into everything he does. He doesn't just take on a lot of work and then not spend time with it. So whether it's Zeal's project or 2 World Trade Center or the number of other things he's doing with WeWork and others, he's really very involved and incredibly creative and fun to work with. And high energy.
And you always hear that most architects don't usually get their first New York City project built until they're 60. I mean, he's just about to turn 40 or something. Also, it's interesting, Robert A.M. Stern, Ken, you have him working on one of your projects. Zeal, you have him working on the Belnord conversion. He's also got 15 Central Park West and 220 Central Park South in that area. Ken, same question, is that a concern for you as far as, or is there just an unlimited pool of Robert A.M. Stern buyers?
You know, I think on 81st Street, it's been enormously successful in a very short period of time. And I think that there are buyers who were attracted to the property because he was the architect. And you know, one could say that his motifs and his elements are similar in a lot of the buildings he does, but that's basically what the particular buyer pool in the Upper West Side really liked. And it resonated. I think it brought buyers in. And obviously, we were not selling for the same pricing that 15 Central Park West was selling for. And people looked at it that they were getting an equivalent type of design at a price that was a lot less than they could buy at 15 Central Park West.
So we got to design our 30 Park Place building, which is the Four Seasons in Tribeca, with Bob Stern. And, you know, he's a classical architect in a modern age. And, you know, we sold out at $3,400 a foot. We only have 15 units left out of 157, and we credit a lot of that to Bob's designs.
Ken, I want to ask you about the $110 million apartment you're trying to sell in the Woolworth building. First, how's that going?
Well, at long last, we could get people into it. Woolworth is obviously a beautiful building, a challenging construction job, but the pinnacle was really inaccessible until we reached a point where we could really walk people through it. So we've had several buyers who have been circling, but they've really been circling based on floor plans. And because it's 5 levels, it's almost difficult to comprehend until you can get into it. So actually, just this week is, you know, the week that we could physically start to walk people through the apartment. It's unique, obviously. It's at the top of one of the most classic buildings in the world. The views are amazing, but I think now's the time that we're really going to start bringing the people in who've been circling. Again, we were concerned about safety because it was such an unusual layout. It's really a vertical layout. It's about 10,000 feet, but a lot of it is vertical. And now we could finally get people in, and we'll see where we go with it.
And how do you market for a project like that? I mean, that's such a short list of people that can afford a unit like that.
Well, we've been working with Sotheby's. We've worked with Josh Judge and Stan Ponte, who've been great. And one of the reasons that we brought Sotheby's in is because their connections to the art world. And they've been very successful at art auctions. And we believe that some of the people who'll be coming to this apartment are going to be clients of Sotheby's who've bought art from them in the past. And it's kind of a cross-dimensional method of marketing, not something we would traditionally do on any other property, to be candid with you. But we think the tie-in here has been very, very useful, and we think we'll be successful at it.
I'm sure I'm missing some numbers here, but it cost you $68 million to buy the upper floors of the Woolworth building. It cost $100 million on renovation, so that's $168 million. You have 33 units in the building. The penthouse is asking $110 million. So you're in pretty good shape if you can sell that for $110 million. And are penthouses where the developers typically find their profit? That's what I've heard. And I'm asking this to Zio.
Let's put it this way. I'm not sure how anyone else feels, but if we're all sitting here banking on getting $110 million as the sole method of making a profit on a property, then we really haven't underwritten it correctly.
So you could lower the price by $5 million, and we could have a live auction right now, if you're negotiable.
I was thinking that someone would just come up and buy it immediately, but
anybody? Zio, it's interesting with your Highline project. The highest priced unit is $25 million. That's a penthouse, but it's a half-floor penthouse. So did you go more modestly than you could have on that project as far as the highest price unit?
That wasn't reported correctly.
Okay. Glad you're here today.
25 million to get into the sales gallery. No, we have 65% of our units are size 2,000 square feet or less, so it's definitely affordable, approachable luxury. Most of our units will sell between $4 to $8 million. We're assuming our pricing will start, which we opened up our sales gallery as we speak, in the $4,000 foot range. But the feedback we're getting from what we're doing is hopefully we are the downtown version of 15 CPW because of our offerings are unparalleled with all the competition out there. So between the architecture, the air and light, and the Six Senses hotel brand, you started this panel by saying we're in the late innings of the cycle. And last time I heard that, somebody responded, it's a double header. So clearly things that are unique. You saw it with the penthouse that the Getty property commanded over $60 million, and you're seeing it at 452 Park. You're seeing it at Steve Ross building. So things that are unique, things that are irreplaceable. I'm sure Ken will experience that with this irreplaceable apartment at the Woolworth building. There's a lot of wealth, and it's looking for things like blue chip art, as you're seeing in the auctions this week, commanding pricing that's almost record.
So it seems like there's the high end of the unit, and Bentley, you've been targeting stuff at the lower end. So you're telling me right now that before the panel that the highest price you'll go on a Manhattan unit is 1.5 or 2 million. What sort of absorption velocity and sales are you seeing with your projects?
Yeah, our company target for mid-rise and the middle market, like the big player they do, or the luxury. We have a high-rise building. We call for stop for the building at Midtown because we're not comfortable for the luxury condo today market. So we try to target for a condo below around $2 million or try to below $2 million. So we can have the local buyer able to buy. We're not target for international buyer because international market is almost dead, So we are really pretty conservative for our investor,
And in terms of planning for the next cycle or planning ahead, Marty Silverstein owns a big development site on West 41st Street. At one point, there was talk about it being 106 stories, enormous, in condos. Seems like it's changed since then. So can you talk about sort of the evolution of the project and what you see for that area and what the kind of the mix is now and what it says about the next cycle?
Sure, we're going to announce something shortly, but we bifurcated that site into an east and west parcel, and we pushed all the residential to the western side of the site. And so on 11th Avenue and 41st Street, we'll be building about a 58-story condominium with 499 units. The units are average size 950 square feet, so much smaller than what's available in the market today, and we think 85% of the units will be priced under $3 million, and we think that's a market that's just missing today.
Mm-hmm. And how does it tie in? It's a little farther north, but does it tie into the whole Hudson Yards ecosystem? How does that affect things?
It's actually within the Hudson Yards zoning, and it will benefit eventually as Hudson Yards moves north. And so you can see the parks, you can see the shelters, the culture shed, and the retail and everything that's coming up out of Hudson Yards right from our site, and it's all coming towards us.
So do you see it as people who are going to be working there are going to be the natural buyers?
Sure. And we own 2,300 units catty corner on 42nd between 11th and 12th in our Silver Towers building and our River Place building, and we think there'll be a lot of those folks who rent there that might be buyers there as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so talking about Hudson Yards, obviously you're working on all the World Trade Center buildings. The amount of commercial development now is just crazy. You know, if you look back 10 years ago, it was zero commercial square footage of commercial development or major towers year after year, it seemed like. Now there's 15 million square feet that are going to come to market this year. What do you tell when you're about to open 3 World Trade? What do you tell them when they say, oh, I could go to Hudson Yards or Manhattan West instead? What's the sales pitch versus those other places?
Well, first let's talk about the new development. When you take all of Manhattan, we're somewhere between 450 and 500 million square feet of office space. And if you look at London, in the last 20 years, London's replaced 50% of its stock with new office space. So 50% of whatever their office stock is has been built in the last 20 years. If you go to Hong Kong, that number is 80%. Wow. When you go to New York, that number is 7%. So we are not competing with the world on new office space. So if you work for Ernst & Young or Morgan Stanley or McKinsey, and you go to your satellite office in London or Sydney or Hong Kong or Shanghai, and you go there and you say, wow, these are really nice offices, and then you come home to New York and you're in your 50-year-old building, why is our headquarters, building not as nice as Shanghai and Sydney and these other cities? So New York needs to compete by building new office stock, and that's a lot of what World Trade Center, Hudson Yards, and others have been doing, Manhattan West, and successfully. When you take all that new space, there's only about 20 million to 22 million square feet of new space, over 500 million square feet, and about 3/4 of that is already spoken for. So, for instance, we're opening 3 World Trade Center on June 11th. It's a 2.5 million square foot building. It's the largest building we've ever built, but 33% of that building is already leased. So Group M, which is a division of WPP, the largest advertising firm in the world, is opening with 700,000 square feet, and by July of this year, there'll be 4,000 bodies in seats in our building. We just signed another 4 floors to one of the major consulting firms, which I'm not allowed to announce yet, and then we signed another floor to the 13th stock exchange in the United States, which is called IEX. And so that building's opening with 1 million square feet leased. Right next to it is 4 World Trade Center, 2.3 million square feet. That building is now 100% leased. We did a large lease with Spotify at the beginning of last year, and that building is now complete and fully occupied. 7 World Trade Center, 1.7 million square feet. It's 100% leased. Moody's is our main tenant. So when you go to Hudson Yards and look at what Related's doing, you go to Manhattan West and look what Brookfield's doing, most of those buildings are spoken for.
Mm-hmm. And how about 2 World Trade, the last piece of it? Are you close to an anchor tenant? What sectors are you looking in? And you can take a nice long vacation, I'm assuming, when you finish that, because that's a whole ballgame, right?
Well, that's great timing, thanks. We heard last week that Deutsche Bank is not coming to 2 World Trade Center. They're actually going to go to Columbus Circle. So we are still looking for a tenant for 2 World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm. It also strikes me, if you look at Manhattan real estate over the last 20 years, it's all a story of the West Side. It's, Tribeca, up to the Meatpacking District, up to Chelsea, up to Hudson Yards, up to Time Warner Center, up to Riverside. On the East Side, you have 1 Vanderbilt, and that's, it seems like among the major projects, that's it. So you're starting to see, 270 Park Avenue, where JP Morgan's tearing down their building and putting up a new one. Is it even on your radar, like teardowns on the East Side? Do you think that's something that's going to be a thing later on, or that you guys would ever look at? Or it would be a market reality, speaking to kind of what you were talking about with Hong Kong and London?
I think it's going to be tough for the east side buildings to redevelop like Chase's unless you own it long-term. So if you're the Rudins or other Fisher Brothers who own their buildings long-term, and you can afford at a low basis to take a building down, empty your tenants out, then take the building down and rebuild new and larger, that might make sense. But if you're an investor and you just bought a building on Park Avenue, you're not taking that building down anytime soon because you probably paid too much for it. But that's what Chase is doing. Chase is taking their building down. It's going to be very exciting, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, we purchased our first office building. We bought one in Florida in Palm Beach Gardens, but we also bought one on 43rd and 3rd. And it was roughly 45% vacant. And we've gone ahead and just, refurbished the entire building, reskinned it. It's a mid-level building. It's a B building. We're getting great rents. We're about 92% leased. And we've also been working on a project in the east side, in the Plaza District, for about a year and a half in terms of trying to put it together to build a new office building. And Marty's 100% right. The product available is old. I think the average age of a building in an office building in the Plaza District was something like 72 years old. They've got columns running right through the middle of floor plates. They're not done in any modern way whatsoever. But in order for us to put this deal together, I said we've been working for a year and a half, and I believe it will probably take at least another year to see whether or not it's even going to work.
So are you getting, because it seems like all the east side tenants, the big ones like Pfizer moving over to the west side, for example, is that opening up space for B and C tenants on the east side currently to move into the spaces? Is that kind of the investment play?
No, the investment play on 43rd Street was that we were a block away from Grand Central, plain and simple. And you could rent space anywhere from 3,000 to 8,000 feet. It was really a meat and potatoes kind of office building that was very, very run down. But the other building that we're looking at in the Plaza District, we're not doing large floor plates. It'll be a boutique building. It'll only be about 180, 190,000 feet. But your largest floor plate's only going to be about 11,000 feet.
But New York is a very resilient place. If you look at the history of movements of office tenants, all the tenants that are leaving 6th Avenue, Park Avenue, wherever, and going downtown or to Hudson Yards, that space will be backfilled, and not necessarily by B and C tenants. They'll be backfilled by tenants who may not pay $90 a foot, maybe they're paying $80 a foot or $75 a foot, but all those buildings will backfill and relet.
We see this market as strong as you're articulating. We have a project in Nomad on Park Avenue South where Bjarke Engel is doing another office building for us. It's our first office building in many years. And we evaluated the residential component for 3 years, decided to convert to office for a number of reasons. Our site is in a commercial zone, so with the de Blasio administration's policies, I would have required about 25% affordable. On the office building, the biggest secret in town is the 27 to 29% gross up on office buildings. So our building site grew by about 50%, converting that site from residential to office. We're currently going to be building the tallest building in Midtown South and Nomad, about 800 feet, about 700,000 square feet. And the floor plates fit perfectly within the district of 12 to 15,000 square feet. So it's another big version of commercial.
Speaking of other commercial development you're working on, I thought it was interesting with the Bjarke Engel's project in West Chelsea. Retail is not in a great spot right now. I mean, everybody knows that in terms of leasing and that sort of thing. So what you're doing at the base of that building, it looks like you're doing some traditional retail, but you're also putting a spa there, and with the idea of having an urban resort in the center of the city. Is that something, did you start with traditional retail on that kind of schematic design, and then you went to that, or how did that kind of evolve?
Well, the Highline corridor, which our seller Jerry Gottesman, may rest in peace, envisioned from Little West 12th Street all the way to Hudson Yards today, a uninterrupted retail corridor. And part of his rezoning of our site contemplated everybody along the path creating retail. So our project, the latest project a block away, our original project on 19th Street, I think within 5 years you'll see an uninterrupted offerings of retail all the way down from 12th Street so that'll help. And with all the apartments and all the buildings and offices moving there, it creates much more of a retail demand. Having said that, as a developer, you try to create retail that is enhancing the experience of your owners with us, because of the Six Senses hotel brand and the wellness spa and restaurant expertise, we're envisioning things that would be very beneficial to people who want to live there. Currently, it's a club, a spa, some restaurants, and some other food use and wellness groups.
One thing that people are talking about today is the pace of sales in the residential market in general, and it's been pretty slow. What sort of is a reasonable sellout do you expect to see at your project, or do you hope for? I've heard figures as low as 1% of inventory every month that some developers are seeing. Now, obviously, if you got a unique product, that's different, but what are you hoping for?
Well, I mean, every project is different. You control your velocity by your pricing. Again, if your product is unique, people tend to want to buy it. As social media has evolved, information now is available to everybody about everything. So as a developer, nothing is proprietary anymore. So there isn't anybody who walks into a unit, no matter what building it is, that hasn't seen many other units. So with that information, you just really need to price within your comp set and try to create an experience that people can't replace elsewhere for more money or less money.
I think to add to that is that the amount of new product that's going to be on the market in the next 2 or 3 years is going to recede, for the simple reason that inexperienced developers will be precluded from entering the marketplace. And finding sites is a challenge. Putting sites together is difficult. And attracting the equity to projects is also difficult as well, although it's loosening up a bit, I'd say, in the last 90 days or so. But remember that if you track building permits over the last 2 years, they've gone down. And a lot of the product that's out there is slowly but surely being eaten away. And I don't think anyone on this panel would ever try to sell out a project for $4,000 a foot in an area that was not going to get that pricing. So because of the experience of developers who are going to be doing this work in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, I think that we're in a good position to be developing new condominium housing.
It also seems like there's just not a lot of big projects in general. I mean, Marty, maybe your 41st Street project would be an exception to that rule, but Zeal, the Highline project is how many units?
Close to 230.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're not small projects. You have Gary Barnett's got 800 units down at Manhattan Square or Manhattan South, whatever you call it. And there's some big projects out there. But I agree with both these guys. I mean, the market cycles come and go, and everyone wants to be open. When you open your building, you'd love to be 100% sold, but you never are. And so you have to sort of move your pricing with what's happening with the market and figure out where you compete.
But what Marty's going to be building in terms of pricing at that level, our building in Noma, before we got anyone in the building, we sold every one bedroom and every one bedroom with den because they were priced between $1.4 million and $1.8 million. There was nothing on the market. It was a sweet spot. There was nothing on the market. And that was, over the last 6 months when allegedly the market wasn't, as strong as it was 2 years ago. So I think if you offer the correct type of product in the correct type of market, the units are going to sell. They're going to may take a little longer, and as Zeal said, people may walk around to 3 or 4 different properties. I think when we all started, maybe 20, 25 years ago, people were more neighborhood-centric. I'm not sure they're as neighborhood-centric as they are.
Right. That was when it was hard to get wealthy buyers out of the Upper East Side. How about distressed projects? Are those on your radar as far as opportunities for investment? Bentley, I know you recently picked up a project on the Lower East Side in Delancey that was a distressed project. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that project we basically buy from another about 8 years on the market. They are always asking Lower East Side asking for $500 per square feet of land, but we finally, after 1 year integration, get the land for $420 per square feet, Lower East Side, with a pool plan. Basically, I can say, but this price I think it makes sense for Lower East because we are target for Lower East Side for ODA high-end design. We target for sale for 18 to 2,000 per square feet. We and then very efficiency unit. So we try to target for $2 million around. So one bedroom about 1.2, 1.5. Right. So I think we are very confident for our product. And then because we have our own construction team, we are targeting for 400 to 450 per square feet hard cost. So 420 land cost, we make a pretty profitable for our project if we target for 18, you know.
It kind of speaks to what you were saying before about the, aiming for the lower end of the market and having high absorption there. Zeal, one thing that you've done that I've read about is condo inventory loans.
Write it?
What?
Did you guys write it?
What's that?
Did you guys write it?
Yeah, probably. I might have edited it. Condo inventory loans, is that a newish thing in the market? Or I didn't see that as much during the last cycle, unless I missed it. Is that something that, I guess brokers complain about that from the point of view of, the developer can kind of just kick the can down the road. How do you view condo inventory loans?
I don't think it has anything to do with kicking the can down the road. There's an abundance of capital out there. Capital is cheap. Capital is chasing opportunities globally. It's getting more difficult to find opportunities, how to spend your cash. So inventory loans are essentially financing your unsold inventory that gets paid out over a period of time. So it reduces, generally it's much less interest than what a construction loan would cost. So developers who have sold out, I would say at least 50% of their inventory and paid off a good part of the construction loan now have the opportunity to borrow additional money. And the inventory loans are structured where as you sell the units, they actually get paid off. So it's great business for a bank. It's a short-term business for the bank.
And did that not exist last boom cycle?
I don't recall. Different forms of it existed, certainly, but it's become more popular, again, because there hasn't been as much new recent development, probably because the price of land has to adjust. But it's just another form of getting money out the door on a project that has all the comps in the world, because your own building, it's comped. So it's very easy to underwrite.
Marty?
I'd say it's certainly not a new form of financing, but there's certainly a lot more players in that inventory loan market today. So we did an inventory loan on our One West End project on 59th and West End in December of last year. We had sold about 200 out of our 246 units. We had pre-sold our medical office space to Touro College for their women's dormitory, and we had just leased the retail. And it was a perfect time to recapitalize the project. And we did a $385 million recap with Deutsche Bank, which allowed us to take all our equity out of the project. Because when you do a construction loan, there are lots of risks involved. When you finish completion, and now you're just dealing with absorption and maybe the leasing of the rest of your project, it's a different risk, and you can find more efficient capital for that.
Right. These guys have a lot going on. I'm going to have to save a question about $1 billion project for the end of the panel. Marty, you are looking at buying ABC's Upper West Side campus for $1 billion. Can you tell us anything about that?
Not allowed to yet, sorry.
That's why I saved it for the end.
2 months.
And what do you guys see as a broad question, then I want to turn it over to the audience for a question or two. What do you see for the next 12 to 18 months and in terms of geopolitics, interest rates, how buyers are responding to the tax cut? Can you give me a solid answer about all that?
I'm just a dumb developer, but I hope Zeal's right and that we're in the doubleheader.
Zeal, you really track all these things. I guess maybe a better question is, how do you even start to figure out how to track all these things? What's your methodology?
Well, information is available to you on a fingertip all the time, so to track it is easy. What to look for is really what the question is, right? So
do you have a lot of bookmarks that just say, here's my link to global shipping trends, and here's my link to...
You do it long enough, eventually you learn from your mistakes. But generally speaking, interest rates are certainly trending upwards. 40% of the high-end taxpayers in New York are pass-through taxpayers, so effectively their rate has been reduced by about 4 to 6%. So I think it's been a net positive for 40% of the population. The other 60% will obviously probably have to pay more taxes. That impacts on your ability to buy real estate. Overall, I don't see any negative impact on condo market in New York and within the boroughs generally, because those who are affording to buy apartments for, let's say, at least $2 million or more, the impact is negligible.
Remember that there was always doom and gloom that when the 421A changed, and the tax law changed, that it was inevitably going to affect, condominium sales prices, the market, et cetera. There's always going to be a limited inventory in New York, and there are people who want to live in New York. So, when the tax law changed, people said, gee, in the $1.5 to $2 million to $3 million range, it's going to affect the marketplace. We really haven't seen it at all. So granted, there are always going to be blips, and there are always going to be news, and there are always going to be events that take place that may affect the marketplace. But, all the people up here are general optimists, or else we wouldn't be in the development business.
And if you look at the number of cranes, I was just reading this recent study. On the West Coast, you have 2 or 3 times the number of cranes than you do on the East Coast. And if you look at LA, you've got 2 or 3 times the number of cranes than you do in New York. So it's always kind of limited inventory. But I wanted to turn it over to the audience. Let's do 1 or 2 questions. Yes, right in the middle there.
Sorry. Hi there. I have a question regarding something that Seal mentioned, land prices. Where do you expect these to go and why?
Well, that's a very general question. Generally, developers who are buying land, you start with how much you expect to rent your property for, whether it's an office, a hotel, or an apartment house, and or sell, and you work your way backwards. So if pricing adjusts in the office market, you have to pay a little less for your land. Taking into consideration as well, interest costs are going to be higher than they were, probably not much higher, but a little bit higher than they were in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's really just working, creating a business model that does not anticipate future appreciation from where you are at the time. And by the way, when you buy land, you have to guess where the market's going to be 3 to 5 years from then, because that's how long it takes to develop real estate in this town.
Mm-hmm. Another question? Yes, in the front row.
Hi. The Ocean report just came out, and it showed that the average price drop in luxury was 11%. The Doug Sullivan report came out and said that for the first quarter of this year, the average drop in luxury was about, I think, 15%. With that said, what is the outlook of affordable housing? And coming from a finance background, are we betting too much on luxury and not enough on affordable housing? That's all. Thank you.
I mean, I think there are 2 different market types, luxury and affordable. Do you guys see city and state incentives that are coming down the pike that make it look attractive to you?
I mean, look, there's lots of different projects. It's a tough question because you no longer mix affordable housing with condos. You used to be able to do that. You can't do that anymore. When you build mandatory inclusionary in today's market, you now have to have 30% affordable. So if you're doing a rental project, it's probably going to be a 70-30 unless you can get away with doing all market rate and you don't need a tax abatement. And with land prices where they are, it's very difficult in Manhattan anyway to do a rental project. So I think there's a lot of pressure on. It's tougher to do affordable housing deals in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the affordable housing only available in a coming up neighborhood. We consider the condo along below $1,000 per square feet, like Flatbush, the neighborhood. You can do affordable housing with rental, but still not condo.
Let's do one more question.
Hi.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I've seen a real decline in foreign buyers, and I wonder what you think would be the most effective remedy in trying to attract them, because they seem to pay the highest price per square foot. Thanks.
I don't think there's been a decline in foreign. Generally, 20% of the inventory is gone to foreigners. There are certain buildings in the city that are more foreign-centric, but overall, the inventory of U.S. luxury condominiums was fueled as a minority percentage to foreigners. Frankly, that's affected by the currency exchange rates and all. But unlike London, which passed several regulations for foreigners and taxing, New York, irrespective of the administration's desire to pass some of these taxes, as long as the Senate's still being controlled somewhat by the Republicans, I don't think we have a danger of changing that. But we don't see, certainly our company hasn't seen less of a foreign interest. It hasn't been that great overall.
I completely agree with Zeal. I think there's a large international population out there that is investing in the U.S. and New York City in particular. It's a safe harbor for the world's capital, and they continue to do so. I think there's been maybe a reduction in the number of Chinese borrowers because of capital constraints, but the Koreans, the Japanese, the Middle Easterners are all still coming here. London, Great Britain, Europe, Canada, South America, everyone's putting their capital here.
Thanks, guys. I want to end with one factoid that I came across in some background reading for this, but the average price of a new development condo has quadrupled in the past 10 years in Manhattan. So if you want to take the long view in all this, it's pretty, it looks pretty good. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody coming out here today.